Just as the man is about to get into his car, he notices someone glaring at him, and seconds later, several assassins begin closing in. The man then realizes that every security camera in the parking garage has been disabled, making it clear that the attackers came prepared. Facing enemies who came fully prepared, the man can only pretend to remain calm.
뭐냐고 이 씨발놈들아.
When no one answers and they continue moving closer, he realizes he must strike first if he wants to survive. Even the toughest fighter can be overwhelmed when he is outnumbered, and the deadliest attack is often the blade that comes from behind. These men may look like respectable businessmen in suits, but beneath the surface, they are still a ruthless and notorious criminal organization. Their target today is the one man they have never been able to control, Prosecutor Hong. Simply because he blocked their path, they have decided to erase him from the world without leaving a trace. Prosecutor Hong finally realizes that this gloomy day has prepared the perfect funeral for him. Today's movie is Man on High Heels, a film that cannot be placed inside a single genre. On the surface, it is a brutal Korean gangster action movie, but at its core, it is a tragic story about gender identity and a soul trapped inside the wrong life. A tough man with the perfect masculine physique, yet deep down, he has always known that he wants to live as a woman, just as he finally gathers the courage to become his true self. Fate pushes him toward a bottomless abyss. In Korea, attacking a prosecutor is serious enough to bring the entire police force down on a criminal organization, but every security camera near the scene was destroyed in advance, leaving the police with nowhere to begin. Still, no crime is ever completely flawless, and even a careful fox will eventually leave something behind. Someone near the crime scene must have escaped the gang's attention. The police quickly identify a suspect, but he refuses to answer a single question. He knows that Hyogun's gang is far more terrifying than the officers sitting in front of him. The department therefore sends Ji-wook, the ace of the major crimes unit, to handle the urgent case. Ji-wook always finds a way to make suspects talk. The suspect believes that keeping his mouth shut will save his life because he knows exactly what Hyogun's gang does to informants. What he does not realize is that the man sitting across from him is 10 times more frightening.
자, 스케줄만 말해줄게. 너 검거될 때 영상이야. 여기 봐봐. 우리 사무실 애들이 너 덮칠 때 네가 반항을 너무 심하게 했어. 여기서 이렇게 부딪히고 차이고 넘어지고 응? 구르고 이랬으니까 네 어깨 쪽, 모가지, 허리, 무릎 다 부러질 수도 있었던 상황이 지금은 멀쩡하지만 증거 자료엔 체포 당시의 영상을 낼 거야. 네 말은 지금부터 네 몸을 하나하나씩 부러뜨리겠다는 뜻이야.
Ji-wook never shouts or uses torture, but the moment he sits down, his eyes alone feel sharp enough to cut someone open. The moment the suspect notices the centipede-shaped scar on Ji-wook's neck, fear shoots through his entire body. Every scar on Ji-wook's body clearly came from a mission that could have killed him. Seoul's criminal underworld knows him as the Invincible Titan, a man whose name alone is enough to spread fear. His body is covered in knife wounds and bullet scars, while metal plates have been placed inside his arms and legs after countless injuries. Ji-wook always works alone and never carries a gun, not because he wants to look impressive, but because his bare hands are enough to leave a dozen gangsters begging for mercy. But no one can imagine the secret hidden inside this perfect body that men envy and women admire. Yoon Ji-wook has always wanted to become a woman, and that secret goes back to his teenage years. He once fell in love with a male classmate named Lee-suk, but their young and forbidden romance ended when Lee-suk could no longer endure society's judgment and took his own life in front of him. Before dying, Lee-suk asked Ji-wook to protect his younger sister, Jang-mi. From that day forward, Ji-wook buried his true desires deep inside himself. The more he rejected the woman within him, the harder he tried to make himself appear as masculine as possible. He trained obsessively, fought without fear, and used every scar on his body as proof of his masculinity. But no matter how carefully someone hides, the smallest details can still reveal the truth. When he sits down, he gently folds his hands together, and when he drinks, his little finger rises without him noticing. Hidden inside his home are lace underwear, lipstick, and high heels, while he secretly visits an unlicensed clinic for estrogen injections. Only when he applies eyeliner in front of the mirror does a brief light appear in his eyes. Ji-wook has turned himself into an island, because the outside world only sees the invincible titan, while he alone knows that beneath the armor is a soul imprisoned for half a lifetime. Using the suspect's information, the police learn that Hyogon's gang planned the attack, so Ji-wook contacts his most valuable informant, Jang Mi. Through her connections, Ji-wook quickly discovers where Hyo-bol is hiding. After organizing something as serious as the assassination of a prosecutor, Hyo-bol naturally plans to leave the country until the situation calms down. Although ordering the attack was already dangerous, Hyo-bol is even more afraid of the man who has always been his greatest enemy. Just as he worries that Ji-wook may find him, he looks up and sees the one person he never wanted to face again.
지금까지 윤영 얘기가 반이었어.
Hyo-bol fears Ji-wook from the bottom of his heart, but he is certain that Ji-wook will not use a gun. Surrounded by his men, Hyo-bol suddenly becomes confident enough to challenge the most feared detective in Seoul. Since they refuse to understand the danger in front of them, Ji-wook decides to show them what true helplessness feels like. His attacks are lightning fast and brutally efficient, and ordinary gangsters trying to stop someone with this level of combat experience are like eggs striking a rock. Ji-wook even mocks Hyo-bol while fighting, reminding him that he does not avoid guns and handcuffs out of principle, but because these criminals are not worth wasting bullets or completing paperwork for. Ji-wook fights with the brutality of a wild animal, leaving Hyo-bol completely stunned. After watching all of his men fall, Hyo-bol finds himself alone with the monster he once tried to provoke and becomes too frightened to speak. Ji-wook gives him one last chance to repeat his earlier insult with the same confidence.
포크가
This time, Ji-wook beats Hyo-bol so badly that he spends half a month fighting for his life in intensive care.
팔 줄 불러도 이 새끼들이 이거 할 줄 안 됩니다.
The second major figure in the organization is Hyogon, a ruthless and unpredictable gangster. After Ji-wook sends his so-called older brother Hyo-bol to the hospital, Hyogon should want revenge, but deep inside, he has always admired Ji-wook. Years earlier, he personally watched Ji-wook fight an entire crowd alone, and that cold, vicious strength made him seem like a natural-born destroyer. Hyogon has wanted to recruit Ji-wook for years, and his man recently discovered that the detective needs money and is considering leaving the police. Hyogon therefore visits without an invitation and asks Ji-wook to recover a huge collection of unregistered bonds seized by the police, offering him an extremely tempting payment. Ji-wook would normally reject such an offer without hesitation, but his restless soul desperately wants to change and finally live as his true self. The payment is exactly enough to cover the cost of his gender-affirming surgery. After spending half his life fighting criminals, Ji-wook struggles with the decision countless times before finally surrendering to reality for the first time. But the only reason this hardened detective lowers his head is so he can finally become a woman. Ji-wook retrieves the bonds and hands them to Hyogon, but Hyogon soon realizes that he has been deceived. The police froze the bonds long ago, making them impossible to exchange and no more valuable than waste paper. Even worse, Hyo-bol plans to make Hyogon take responsibility for the entire crime. Hyogon explodes with rage and finally understands why Ji-wook agreed so quickly. He treated Ji-wook like an idol, but Ji-wook treated him like a fool. and to Hyo-gon. That humiliation is unforgivable. Hyo-gon makes a terrifying decision: kill everyone close to Ji-wook and teach him that stealing his money comes with a price. The first person to suffer is Ji-wook's junior detective, Kim Jin-woo. Jin-woo was a young and passionate detective who has always admired Ji-wook like an older brother. When he discovers that the hero he worships has always wanted to live as a woman, he is overwhelmed by emotions he cannot understand. He goes to Jang-ni's bar to drink until he can barely stand. When he finally stumbles outside, heavy rain is falling, and the darkness of the night provides the perfect cover for murder. Hyo-gon's men attack the young detective in the street and kill him in the most brutal way. Jin-woo collapses in the rain, never knowing that the man he worshipped was still struggling to find the courage to become himself. Jang-ni witnesses the entire attack and is kidnapped by Hyo-gon's men. But Jang-ni is not an ordinary informant, because she is the younger sister of Ji-wook's late lover, Lee Suk. Ji-wook has protected her for years, partly to keep his promise to the man he lost, and partly because she is his final connection to a youth he can never return to. The next day, while the news reports Jin-woo's death, Ji-wook receives a phone call from Hyo-gon while dressed as a woman. Ji-wook has already changed into women's clothing and is preparing to leave the country for surgery and begin a new life. But after seeing Jin-woo's body on television and learning that Jang-ni has been kidnapped, he makes the most difficult decision of his life. He removes his makeup, takes off his high heels, and prepares to fight once more in the identity the world recognizes as male. At that moment, Ji-wook gives up his dream of living as a woman because some responsibilities weigh more heavily than dreams. Meanwhile, after calling Ji-wook, Hyo-gon orders his men to kill Jang-ni before the detective arrives. But Hyo-gon never expects Ji-wook to storm into his headquarters completely alone. In the blink of an eye, two guards collapse to the floor and stop moving. Ji-wook shakes the blood from his hands, but instead of leaving, he calls out to everyone deeper inside the building.
나 왔다. 들어갈게.
His message is clear: send everyone at once so he does not have to hunt them down one by one. These low-level gangsters have all heard stories about the invincible Titan, but when they finally see him in person, they cannot stop laughing.
좋은 거 쓰시는가 봅니다. 냄새가 아주 향긋합니다.
Ji-wook is not sparing them out of mercy. He is waiting for one answer: who killed Jin-woo that night? The inexperienced gangsters continue laughing, completely unaware that they are already standing on the slaughter floor. Before reaching his final target, Ji-wook finally encounters an opponent strong enough to challenge him, but the man begins by mocking him.
여자랑 어떻게 싸우겠나?
이렇게 생긴 여자 본 적 있냐?
The fighter shows no fear and tries to use his greater strength to crush Ji-wook's speed, forgetting that the smallest mistake in a fight to the death can be fatal. Ji-wook locks him in a chokehold and crushes his throat. But when Ji-wook finally stands before Hyo-gon, the fearless detective makes a decision no one expects. For the first time, Ji-wook abandons his pride, throws away his weapon, drops to his knees, and begs Hyo-gon to spare Jang-ni. Seeing his former idol kneeling in such a desperate and humiliating state fills Hyo-gon with anger and disgust. The man he once worshipped as an untamable monster, someone he believed would rather break than bend, is now begging at his feet for the life of a woman. To Hyo-gon, it is pathetic and revolting. Ji-wook repeatedly asks whether Jang-mi is still alive, until Hyo-gon coldly tells him that he arrived too late and the woman he loves has already been burned to ashes. At that moment, Ji-wook's entire world collapses, and although tears gather in his eyes, they never fall. Just like the rage burning inside him, they remain trapped, waiting to explode. Ji-wook charges forward like a wild animal, throws himself at Hyo-gon, and slices the throat of the man responsible for everything. But the surrounding gangsters do not run away and instead stay to fight the wounded beast. Some people may wonder why ordinary gangsters would risk their lives against a man consumed by rage. But in the criminal underworld, retreating at a critical moment becomes a permanent mark of shame. To the remaining gangsters, he looks completely exhausted and only one more attack away from collapsing. Then the most unexpected reversal occurs when Hyo-gon's closest subordinate suddenly betrays him. It turns out the man only pretended to be loyal to Hyo-gon and was secretly working for Hyo-bul. After using Ji-wook to eliminate Hyo-gon, he lets the badly wounded detective escape. With Hyo-gon gone, any suspicion surrounding Hyo-bul also disappears. Jang-mi was never burned alive because the subordinate ignored Hyo-gon's order and kept her alive as protection for himself.
회장님 건강 챙기십시오.
After surviving the battle, Ji-wook gives up the dream that has divided his heart for so many years. He grows a beard and returns to the masculine life he once tried to escape. In the end, those high heels never make it onto Ji-wook's feet. Some people see this as compromise and surrender, but it can also be understood as the heaviest responsibility one person can carry. When his dream and another person's life are placed on the same scale, Ji-wook chooses the life. He did not lack the courage to live as a woman. He was brave enough to sacrifice himself for someone else and continue living as a person he no longer recognized.